Hello, everyone. We are pleased to be here amongst almost 255 participants today in this very special webinar. This webinar heralds the 4th IPA Asia Pacific Conference, which is to be held from 3rd to 6th January 2023 in Delhi, India. We are all very enthusiastic and looking forward to the event and meeting all of you there. Our aim is to reach out to the larger masses of both analytical and non-analytical communities through this webinar to brainstorm about the question of diversity, which is becoming a prevalent presence inside and outside the clinic. Myriad parts of the world have been experiencing upsurges around the theme of differences in recent times. Many of these experiences push us into the throes of otherness and obscurities, while some bring in the richness of versatile experiences and opportunity for openness. Even though psychoanalysts have shied away from discussing external diversity as an element influencing the psychic spaces of the individuals, the past decade of confrontations, I believe, have impelled us to recognize its impact. India, being the container of such rich differences amongst its people, culture, and community, seems to be a very suitable host for the upcoming conference. Before we begin, I would like to briefly explain the format of how this webinar is going to function. It has two sections. In the first section, each of our two panelists will give a 15 minutes presentation. In the second section, there is a panel discussion amongst the speakers of roughly around 20 minutes. This will be followed by a 30-minute question and answer session devoted to the free exchange of selected questions and ideas between the panelists and attendees. You will find a questions box on the right side of your screen. If you would like to ask any question or write any feedback, please write it in this box. And you can do so throughout the whole course of the webinar from the very beginning. But please remember that we will not be able to answer the questions or read out the comments until both the presentations of the speakers have been completed. Without further ado, we proceed with today's event with two incredibly special speakers from the Asia Pacific region of IPA, Ms. Minnie K. Stool and Dr. Shulmei Fan. Our first speaker is Ms. Minnie K. Stool from the Mumbai chapter of the Indian Psychoanalytical Society. She is a training and supervisory psychoanalyst working with both adult and child clients under the Indian Psychoanalytical Society. She is also the member of the IPA China Committee, a member of the Asia Pacific Psychoanalytic Conference Program Committee, a member of IPA COPAF, and a chair and an organizer of events for continuous professional development of the Mumbai chapter. The title of her paper is Unitary or Unity, Divisiveness or Diversity. She will be talking about how unity and diversity complement each other and are progressive and growth promoting. And on the other hand, to be unitary or divisive is also a process of isolation and fragmentation. I welcome Mr. Stool to take over and begin the panel.
Hello, good morning, good evening, everybody. I read my paper, which I think is specifically addressed to this Congress that we're going to have on the very important and almost very significant aspect that we are facing in the world today about unity and diversity. The theme of the Asia Pacific Psychoanalytic Conference is building bridges and containing diversity, and it captures the essence of the crying need for mutual support and unity in our present world of many different nations and cultures. The establishment of the APPC is now a regular feature since the first APPC 2017 was held in Taipei, Taiwan. The second one was held in Tokyo, Japan in 2019. Both conferences were very successful with a large international participation and excellent presentations. The third one, scheduled to be held in Sydney, Australia, had to be cancelled due to the pandemic. We will now have the forthcoming one in Delhi, India, which will be a hybrid model as participants from the China Study Group and the Taiwan Allied Center may not be able to attend in person. Incidentally, the Indian Psychoanalytic Society is one of the oldest component societies of the IPA. It has just completed celebrating its centenary. With the establishment of the Asia Pacific as the fourth region of the IPA, the APPC is a step towards building a bridge between East and West, making the IPA one psychoanalytic world. Apart from the keynote addresses, annual presentations, we have two committees which will also be presenting work within crucial areas. The COVAP, that is Women in Psychoanalysis, and COFAB, which is Couples and Family Psychoanalysis. The conference will also present work on working through many diversities, race, age, culture, gender, religion, etc. There will be two other very interesting and common ground meetings being together in Delhi, in which small groups will meet and discuss the day's work and their perception and reception of the same. Similarly, there will be small group discussions with presentations of clinical material from all 6 countries. There are several proverbs worldwide that refer to the benefits of unity and the dangers of divisiveness. By unity we stand, by dividing we fall. By Dickinson, the Liberty Song of the United States. One for all and all for one, Alexandre Dumas in The Three Musketeers from France. Our ability to reach unity in diversity will be the beauty and test of our civilization, said Mahatma Gandhi of India. Unity and diversity complement each other and are progressive and growth promoting. The APPC 2023 will have presentations from the East with its ages-old cultures, enriching psychoanalytic understanding alongside presentations from the West. In the consulting room, we welcome the diversity within us and in our patients. However, divisiveness uses differences to splinter and hinder knowledge and stultifies growth, both internal and external. Psychoanalysis and the East. Although the birth of psychoanalysis originated with Sigmund Freud and developed in the West, the concepts have long been well understood in the age-old wisdom of the East. Much of Eastern philosophy is concerned with the very same thing as the West, only there may be different pathways attempting to travel to the same destination. Contentment, happiness, good relationships, and growth. Freedom of thought is essential in psychoanalysis. The attempt to close frontiers, navigate complicated networks, and reconstruct blown bridges to integrate each persona. I could say with the present political situation, one could say among nations as well. This holds true for the health of an individual as well as for the health of a nation or community or family or any groups and civilization itself. Could I have the first slide, please? I'm talking about the word Om, and this is the Sanskrit symbol for the word Om. It might be interesting for the attendees to look it up on Google, and it has this sound. I've often thought of Björn's O as derived from the Sanskrit word Om, considering his earliest years in India with a devout Hindu nanny. While his daughter Parthenope raises the question of just how far her father was shaped by his wartime experiences, there is no doubt in my mind that his analytic avatar was also shaped by his earliest experiences in Mathura that just slipped into his being. Sanskrit is the ancient Indian language that is the root of development of all Indian languages, similar to the role of Latin and Greek in European languages. The first fascinating explanation of this word, of which there are many meanings, was given to me by a colleague when I was working in the corporate world. He told me that Om, and it goes like Om, sort of, was the sound the earth made as it rotated and revolved around the sun. Today, as a psychoanalyst, I see it as quite a significant metaphor for ultimate truth, the central force of life, search for enlightenment, illumination, at one ment, to have a core that keeps you in place, maybe for the fetus baby, the rhythm of his mother's heartbeat that centers him. Next paragraph is on the psychoanalytic concepts embedded in Indian myths. Just as Freud came to understand the truth in myths as an ancient civilization's way of understanding the very basis of human nature, e.g., example, Oedipus Rex, Narcissus, etc. There are equally deep and wonderful studies of human nature in Indian and Oriental myths. This is what I referred to as the universal truth of myths and the commonality of these themes across the globe. In the APPC 23, we will be able to see the influence of Eastern culture in psychoanalysis itself, as much as in psychoanalytic work with patients in these 6 countries. I will give some examples of how the myths of India have helped me in creating reverie and alphabetizing the unrepresented in my patients. My patient X has been struggling with an addiction. We have been speaking of the difficulty of breaking out of it. In a session, he mentions that he feels that he is caught in this chakra vyuha. This is a significant episode in the Mahabharata, which is a Sanskrit epic narrating the conflict between rivals from the same family locked in a bitter battle to claim a kingdom. It contains many narrative episodes as well as the Bhagavad Gita, which means the Song of God and is a philosophical treatise and a way to live life. This Chakravyuha is a battle formation as both defensive and aggressive. In one episode, the god Krishna is narrating a battle strategy to the pregnant Subhadra, the wife of one of the bravest of the warriors, Arjun, while she's lying down and listening to Krishna's philosophies. He tells her of the way to break into the enemy's impregnable formation, the Chakra Vyuha, which is what the slide is showing. Subhadra is pregnant with Abhimanyu. While she's listening, she falls asleep. Abhimanyu from inside the womb is listening and keeps saying, Krishna thinks it is Subhadra who's paying attention. Suddenly he realizes that she's asleep and it is Abhimanyu inside the womb that is listening. He immediately stops the narration. Years later in battle, Abhimanyu uses the strategy and breaks into the enemy's defensive circle. He wreaks havoc on the enemy and then has to get out. But he has not heard the strategy of getting out because Krishna had stopped the narration. He is then trapped and killed. There are slightly different versions of the story, but this is the one I was told when young, and when my patient narrated this, this is what was my reverie and metaphor for how he got into the addiction to avoid the agonizing pain of separation and loss. To be the victor, not the vanquished, but now being caught in it, found that he did not know the way to get out of it. Next, slide 3 refers to the splitting of the object into good and bad. Another Indian myth, which so graphically illustrates the infant's omnipotent illusion and the division of the primary object into good and bad, is that of Krishna, the child god, and the demoness Putana. Krishna's uncle, the king Kansa, was told he would be killed by a son of Devaki. So he killed every child born to her. When Krishna was born, his mother Devaki managed to spirit him away in a basket. Then Kansa sent the demoness Putana to poison her breast and offer it to the baby Krishna. Krishna immediately attacked the breast and destroyed Putana. This tale was told to me by a very ill patient who had lost his mother to breast cancer. It is not difficult to conjecture the terror of his fantasy world conveyed to me by this narration. There is also a myth about Krishna and what we can see as the good breast or the available breast. This is represented by the gopis, who are cowherders, women who adored Krishna. This is slide 4. Yeah. Who adored Krishna and romped with him in the Elysian fields of Vrindavan. Another myth is told of the infant Krishna who is trying to get to a pot of butter, conveying the good breast, broke it in trying to eat it all up. Endearingly, when his mother asks him who broke it, he denies it and is indulgently hugged by her. Next is about Oedipus in Oriental culture. There's a particular point that has completely different perceptions between the Eastern and Western cultures. This is about the Oriental concept of filial piety. In one UK-based comedy, an Indian father tells his son that Prince Charles is of Indian origin. When the son questions the father in indignation as how can he say such an absurdity, the father replies, which 62-year-old son still lives with his mother? He is Indian. Indian myths are often the reverse of the Oedipal myth. The father kills the son. The myth about King Yayati, who is aging and debilitated. He wants to regain his youth. He consults a sage who says he can regain it if one of his sons will take on his old age and give him his youth. All his other sons refuse, but Puru, the youngest, agrees to take on the father's old age, and Yayati is young again, whereas Puru instantly becomes old and feeble. The result is that Puru then inherits the kingdom. Is this so very different from the biblical saying, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth"? Filial piety, containing diversity, building bridges. How important family and family relations are in Eastern cultures is evident in the fact that each relationship in Eastern cultures bears a particular name. Differentiated from the father's side, different when it's from the mother's side. Whereas in Western cultures, every relative may be an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, or a nephew or a niece. These will not only be the nature of external object relationships, but also very much the nature of the internal object relationships and the way internal objects relate to each other. I think we need to respect each culture, and it is not a question or which is better, or that what may be alien to one is viewed as non-progressive in the other. Slide 5. I would now like to bring attention to the Japanese note 5, the one about the pot. Yes, I would like to bring to attention the Japanese art of kintsukuroi, gold repair or joining, brought to my attention by one of my students. The technique is called kintsugi, gold seams. It is the art of restoring broken porcelain through seams then painted in gold. Talk of love, guilt, and reparation. It says every break is unique, and instead of repairing them as new, one embraces the flaws and imperfections and amalgamates it with the rest of the fragments, making the object more beautiful and stronger. Can we think of this as our work as analysts with our patients? Goldman, in his 2013 paper, Vital Sparks and the Form of Things Unknown, refers to the Polish Nobel laureate Szymborska's poem on the holothurian, a sea slug. It attaches and divides itself into unlinked parts, and in the middle of its body, a chasm opens, and its edges immediately become alien to each other. The holothurian manages to die as much as is necessary so as to grow again from the salvaged remnants. Winnicott's work focuses on the precarious relationship between the environment and the psychosomatic equipment necessary to sustain aliveness. Aliveness either grows, flourishes, or is hidden or dampened as the developing child negotiates a personal way of finding a meaningful connection to the environment from which he is all the time also differentiating himself. Slide 6, please. The art of mandala, outer and inner. This art form was created by Buddhist monks and is seen in Tibet, Nepal, India, China, Japan, and Bhutan. It dates back to the 4th century. It is literally a wheel within wheels. Mandala means a circle. It is a geometric design pattern that represents the cosmos, its depth, and its infinity. That within each entity there is another, within which there is still another, more than just a Russian babushka doll. One could see it with the capacity of ever widening and encompassing, while at the same time much detail in the minutest section. I conclude to say that to contain diversity and bridge differences is a way to keep the self alive. To split and to deny differences is to disconnect and keep parts of the self dead or moribund. We hope that many of you will attend this conference, which promises to open up so many avenues of understanding, the central role of psychoanalysis in human nature, and also a way towards integration and promoting, restoring mental health. We all will certainly be enriched with the experience of these 3 days and return to our practice with renewed faith and vigor. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Dastoor. I was listening to your speech and I was recalling all of these mythological stories that I have heard, some that you repeated today while growing up, and it had so many fantastic ideas associated with it. But now, because of being in this profession, it has many different other meanings to it. I guess we can keep on discussing this more once we open the panel for discussion. But now we move on to our second speaker of the program, Dr. Shumei Fan. She is a professional doctor in child psychotherapy and a member of the Taiwan Study Group. She is a child and adolescent psychotherapist trained at the Tavistock, a child analyst under IPA, and an adult psychoanalyst trained with the British Psychoanalytic Society. Dr. Fan is also a translator who has translated a dozen psychoanalytic books into Mandarin Chinese. Presently, she is involved in full-time private practice in Taipei, working with children, parents, and adults. Dr. Fan's paper, The Couch of Paranoia: Some Psychic and Cultural Difficulties Observed in a Taiwan Consulting Room, addresses some specific phenomena which she observed in her patients, like shame and humiliation, in the context of a child rearing practice, along with some other cultural elements that emphasizes little separateness and separation, and that reinforce these emotional difficulties. I welcome Dr. Fan to proceed with the reading of her paper.
Thank you. Thank you. And hello to everybody. I'm going to present a very short paper, and this short presentation is a part of my long journey of exploration about psychoanalysis and culture. I have shared some of the thoughts at other platforms, and I'm glad to share them with you today. And please, Matthew, can I have my slides? And I have my presentations titled The Couch of Paranoia, Some Psychical and Cultural Phenomenon Observed in the Taiwan Consulting Room, in my consulting room. Okay, next slide. I'm going to start my presentation with a quotation from a French psychoanalyst, Keynote. And this is the quotation. One cannot find an example, in fact, of a social cultural context that has not influenced the general direction, the aims, and the conception of analysis itself. The ethical subordination of analysis to the implicit ideals of a specific society is a discernible if analytics draws on concepts, even if theory of universal value. Next slide. Focused on narcissistic defense against the shame and humiliation. And next slide, please. There is some signpost for you in order to follow my talk. Psychoanalysis is a process of understanding the human psychic world, unconscious as well as conscious. And patients come to us seeking for understanding and to be understood. However, we have learned that the nature of that search is never straightforward, and for some, it presents particularly intractable problems for patient and analyst alike. Steiner has described the inability of some patients to tolerate the struggle towards self-understanding. They only wish to be understood. And Britton suggested that this inability is rooted in not having previously established a securely good object relationship with the breast, the primal object, within which the patient felt understood. As a result, these patients are unable to tolerate being observed or finding themselves brink an observing position. For analysis, they are invited to see what is shown to them of their psychic world. Being understood or being seen are equally unbearable. as they evoked an anxiety of narcissistic humiliation or even shame. He argued that the analysis of shame in the analytic situation is necessary so that being seen can be tolerated and allow the conflicts over seeing to be worked through. Meanwhile, from a different investigative angle, Lansky wrote that narcissistic humiliation and shame take place in relation to ego-ideal or ideal ego, while guilt is more to do with superego proper. I would agree with this, though one can never see one phenomenon, the ego in relation to the ego-ideal, without seeing the other, the ego in relation to the superego proper. These two phenomena intertwined in clinical situation. I was inspired by my patients to explore this constellation of difficulties in entering into the analytic process of understanding, which is in the particular way that Britton and Steiner described, and the difficulty is indeed related to ego-ideal and or superego proper. As a psychoanalyst working in Taiwan, I would suggest the relevance of an additional dimension, that of cultural context. I have observed that the individual's internal experience of shame and humiliation may be intensified in a culture that particularly applies shame in order to control family ties. In Taiwanese culture, the individual's narcissism is strongly embedded within that of the family. Namely, one fears not to fulfill familiar narcissism. If one does not fulfill the familiar narcissism, one feels exposed and losing face for oneself and one's family. Here, it is in part the shadow of the ancestors that falls upon the individual, and the ego ideal carries generations of family pride and expectation, contributing to the severe side of superego proper. This process of identification with the ancestral ego ideal is carried through child-rearing practices that focus very little on separateness and separation, concentrating rather on family's unity as a big me. And in this cultural context, the shame or humiliation the patient experienced in the analytic setting is greatly intensified when he or she becomes more aware of separateness and separation, i.e., when the protection offered by the narcissistic relationship breaks down. And this phenomenon is commonly seen in my patients, and the shame or humiliation experienced are likely to bring up feeling of persecution and giving rise to a paranoid state of mind that would prevent analytic process from taking place. The culture of understanding would then turn into the culture of paranoia, in which the patient is unable to listen to the analyst without feeling guilty, ashamed, or being attacked. Next slide, please. The second section focused on separation, separateness, and independence. As human beings, we are torn between longing for dependence and independence, oneness and separateness, and facing the same dilemma. Different cultures facilitate different group characteristics that define value and styles of life, which at the same time define the different qualities of self. While the West went through the Industrial Revolution and the social and economic transformation that followed, the importance of individualization came to the fore. The psychology that has developed in this context emphasizes separation and individualization, which are seen as the normal and healthy path of development, in which the capacities of independence, self-reliance, and self-esteem are expected to develop in individual. In psychoanalytic terms, the individual is required to give up his attachment and identification with the pre-Oedipal and Oedipal parents and established his new attachment towards new objects, and at the same time mourn the loss of the object or the separation. In this context, the parental task is helping children build up a secure relationship in order to give it up and move on, because the children don't belong to the parents and are supposed to go out and explore the outside world. And in Taiwan, despite becoming a democratic and prosperous country with the influence of the West and creating a European American lifestyle, and as if individuation in the urban middle class, the underlying value system that emphasizes unity and family ties remains intact and still profoundly formulates people's thinking and behaving. The separateness and separation are not highlighted as necessary through child rearing. Thus, the self is much less independent and differentiated from others. The individual is also not required to give up the pre-Oedipal and Oedipal parents. On the contrary, identifying with the objects and maintaining them throughout life is culturally valued. The child will be taught that he not only represents himself or his parents, but also his ancestors. Under the shadow of the ancestor is an expression in Mandarin used to explain the individual's achievement. And of course, when one fails, one has not only embarrassed oneself, but also humiliated one's ancestor. And that is to say, the child internalized not only the parents, but also the parents' superego and ego ideal, which is passed on from generation to generation and reinforced by the Chinese or Taiwanese ancestor worship ritual. In this context, the ancestor that blesses you with success might turn into the ghost that haunts you if you fail the expectation. This also indicates that the ancestor is not mourned and would not become the ancestor that walks alongside you. Eventually, what the child needs to mourn is not the loss of the object or separation, but the independence and autonomy he longs for. And of course, at the same time, the child's longing for unity and oneness is satisfied, in which the importance of empathy, obligations, and meeting others' expectation is emphasized, and aggressive attitudes or behavior are strictly forbidden. Although East and West manifest different values and lifestyles, they are also similar. As human beings, we all long for intimacy and experience love, hate, and despair. And this point of view is illustrated by Christopher Patten, the last English governor of Hong Kong, who had 5-year experience of living there. He agrees that in Chinese families, there are stronger family ties and children are more obedient to their parents, but he also argued there are common traits for the entire human race, even though they are expressed differently in different cultures, and the values are universal. However, figuring out the unique and universal parts in different cultures is not an easy task. And due to the limitation of time, I'm going to pause here and invite you to discuss more here and then to come to Asia Pacific Conference in New Delhi to continue the exploration with me and with many other presenters coming from different countries. There will be discussions and presentations on many aspects of psychoanalytic practice in relation to various intra-psychic, social, cultural, economic, and political elements. And thank you for your listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fan, for such a solemn piece of writing. Before moving on to the panel discussion, I would like to remind the audience's attendees again, once again, that you can post your questions and comments on the question box, and we would like to answer that after the panel discussion. Yeah, moving on to our discussion today. Um, Firstly, I had some questions and comments actually. If we would like to answer that, uh, uh, I was listening to the first paper, Mr. Stool, that you were at the end. You mentioned about how divisiveness is like when we are denying the diversity. It's like splitting that is happening, and it reminded me of how we talk about eating often in schizophrenia. And I was trying to connect it with how, along with the diversity in our own country, divisiveness is also increasing. And I was thinking, what are your understanding of how our country functions when it comes to diversity?
Am I being heard?
Yes.
Yes.
Um, this is a bit of a tricky question, Jalam. Um, let me say that there was years ago when maybe I was in school or college, India was such a kind of melting pot of different languages, different religions, and it was, I think, such a image was of such a tolerant society that embraced all. Now, when you have that, you have growth. You have growth not necessarily only in GDP terms, in kind of economic wealth terms, but you have growth as a society that's conscious of others, as a society that's conscious of, in a way, uh, integration, consideration. But the moment you begin to divide this side and that side, then it becomes a very dangerous exercise that increases hatred for the other rather than any compassion or any understanding. And we are seeing it not only in India, we are seeing it worldwide. And I'm thinking, is this a malaise that has always been there, or is it a malaise that has increasingly happened? In this, I may not be right at all, but I'm thinking of this aspect of filial piety, not in the way of that the son has to, achieve for his parents, otherwise he's useless or he's not fulfilled his duty. But that also encourages a sense of responsibility. If you begin to care for your first object, if you have it within you to care, to have gratitude, to have reparation, you can extend it to your other objects. But if the very beginning is, I don't owe anybody anything, I just get what I want for myself, it doesn't allow for integration. And without integration, it's like Balkan states that split into smaller and smaller divisions, and including that for our personality becomes more and more fractured and not able then to be a persona or an ego that is able to be integrated. I don't want to, I'm so tempted to comment on the political situation in India right now, but that would be very politically incorrect. But it isn't going anywhere good.
Thank you so much for answering that. Your filial piety, the thing that you mentioned in the paper, and also while reading Dr. Fan's paper, there was one, I think, few moments in both the papers where I personally could connect with how clients often bring in this shame associated with talking about themselves, and they uh, and Dr. Fan talks about that very vividly in her paper. I was wondering that how I have experienced it always as a cultural phenomenon where thinking about self and talking about self is considered to be some sort of self aggrandizement or some sort of narcissistic bent, and hence looking outwards is much more appreciated than looking within. And I think Dr. Fan talks about something similar. I would like to know both of your experiences about that.
I have similar view on that as you, Jalum. Um, in general, yes, in Taiwan, if you talked about yourself, that would be shameless. Usually you are encouraged to think of others first. And it's kind of a culture that will facilitate that reciprocal treatment, that I think about you and then you think about me. So that becomes, in a way, that's good. Then people become more considerate about each other. But at the same time, that also makes the individual sometimes not knowing what they really are thinking or feeling. And I observe that in my patients as well. It takes them years to find their own voices, their own thoughts. They would describe things, and they quite often wait for me to speak of their feelings for them. They would describe an event and encounters and a situation, a conversations with their parents, with their friends, or with their colleagues, and they wouldn't say what they are feeling or what they are thinking. And it took me quite a while to work with them for kind of to facilitate for them to think of what they are feeling and what they are thinking. You know, they are waiting for me to speak for them about what they think and what they are feeling. And it's quite common in our culture. But it also kind of prevents the individual to really become more intimate with their own thoughts, with their own feelings. And if they start thinking and speaking of their feelings, they started talking about, oh, I'm so selfish that I'm talking about my feelings or what I need or what I want. Yeah, I think the shame is also related to that. You know, sometimes I think it's there isn't, I have this feeling that somehow there is this underlying thoughts about themselves that I myself, I being a human being, or I as a self, is kind of a creature of a shame, that I shouldn't talk about myself. And I should be thinking all the time about others and other people's needs and other people's desires. But you see, it's not that they don't have their own desires, their own needs. They are waiting for other people to speak for themselves and to gratify their own needs and their own desires. So when they didn't meet, when they don't receive that, they become quite angry and kind of resentful inside. But still, it's very hard either way, either to describe their original thoughts and feelings, or to describe just that they feel resentful that other people don't think of them or don't satisfy their needs.
Mr. Stool, would you like to comment something about this?
I don't find this in Indian culture. I think in the Chinese or the more Oriental or even Japanese, this idea of shame, loose face is much more prominent than we have in India. and I don't find my patients have any guilt about talking about themselves. And in fact, they want to talk more and more about what they want and what they feel. You know, the
I
Indian
think,
male is quite entitled. The Indian male is felt to be very, very entitled.
yeah, that I think that makes a difference, because when I'm talking about clients who have difficulty talking about themselves, it's mostly women who have commented like this, that what do I talk about myself? I am better at listening to others. I was also thinking, I mean, I think Mr. Stoor can help us understand that if there is this shame or guilt associated with going within oneself, um, do you think we can connect it with not be you can connect it with being split from the diversity that you were talking about?
Jainam, I'm not quite with you what you're asking me.
I mean, like, if it is difficult for us or an individual to go within one's own self because of some kind of shame and guilt, and hence be more outward looking and not introspective, as Dr. Fan was talking about, uh, do you think, can we connect, is there any connection with this, with the kind of splitting that might be there when we are denying the differences that exists between us?
I haven't found this in my practice at all. In fact, shame has very, very little part really to play unless one talks about which might be universal in even in any Western country. If you don't do well, if you're not as good as the next door neighbor, but I don't think it is a cultural aspect in Indian culture.
Dr. Fan, would you like to state anything about this?
Sorry, I would need you to ask the question again.
Uh, I think because we were talking about how shame and guilt uh, is kind of creating obstructions in analytical process sometimes, as your experience has been. I was wondering whether that has, if there is a split within us in recognizing diversities, whether there is a connection between the two, looking within oneself and also not being able to, I would say, not being able to connect with the differences and let the differences be.
You know, I'm only speaking of my experience. I'm sure that the cultural is very diverse within India, and within Taiwan there will be different kind of personal experiences and personal family experiences, and some people have more feeling more of shame than others. It is an obstacle for some patients that they feel ashamed or they feel humiliated if they explore themselves. And whether that would create this would that become an obstacle for them to see others or to recognize people's kind of the differences between themselves and other people? more often I feel that the difficulty in my patients or the cultural phenomenon I observed, the difficulty is more about not differentiated, and it's very easy to sense that the distance between peoples are so almost like diminished. So you have this kind of you don't see differences when you are interacting with people, and that's why you try to actually you kind of it's become part of you, so you create this sense of that we are all a family. So we like to create this family atmosphere even with friends, with colleagues, and try to not to see the differences. I think that's more to that our difficulties would be more on that side. Sometimes it could go too extreme. We need to see diversities, we need to see differences, and if we don't become a little bit more separated and to be more connected with our own thoughts and feelings, then it's difficult to see differences and to see diversities. So people tend not to say their views, not just about politics, about a lot of things. So if someone expresses his or her views, and you tend to kind of being agreeable, even when you don't agree. And that's try not to see the differences, and that's our problems. So that would become obstacles, yes, that you don't see the richness or the various layers of human being or of the relationships. And if you don't see that, then you cannot define yourself, and you don't know how to define the others. And within the consulting room, that becomes quite prominent because patients come in and they tend to become quite, I would use Meltzer's terms, adhesive, identified with their analyst, and trying to find out what the analyst wants, what the analyst wish them to be or to be thinking or to be feeling. It's almost become an automatic mechanism that they don't even be aware of that. And it takes a long time for them to see that, what they try to do in the consulting room in order for them to become more separated from me. And then they stop, they become panic because they don't know what they think or what they are feeling. And then they feel suddenly like they become like alone in the whole world, and then feeling quite ashamed that he or she is seen. But gradually they would kind of overcome that and start to speak a little bit more about themselves. So it's almost like a very laborious journey in searching for the self, and it takes many years.
Thank you, Dr. Fan. Shall we move on to the questions?
Yes.
Okay. We have our first question. Thank you very much for the presentations. If, as psychoanalysts, we need to adopt a multicultural vision, what do you think psychoanalytic training should be like? Mr. Stool, would you like to address that?
Yes. I was thinking that psychoanalytic training, it should be something like we are going to do for this conference, because we are all from different nations. The IPA is consisting of different nations with different cultures, with different perceptions, with different ideals. And I think the importance now is to somehow work psychoanalytically very much with a hatred of the other. Now, whether the other is outside or the other is inside. And I'm very much concerned with what is going on, particularly in the United States and in Europe, with so many instances of young people just shooting, classroom killings, mall killings. And do we need a psychoanalyst to think that maybe this will become a world phenomena that needs to be thought about how the otherness is treated with so much hatred and so much destruction? I don't know how the IPA will work towards somehow doing something about it, whether nations will have to do something about it, and whether this can become a copycat effect that transfers itself across frontiers, across borders, and it will become a world phenomena and a terror, which now does not become only political terrorism, but individual. And I think that somewhere that is probably what COFAP will try to address, couple and family work, so that you're addressing the family that will bring up the child, which will be the future citizen. And I think maybe that may be one small way in which to go forward.
Dr. Fan?
I don't really know what kind of model would be the kind of helpful, a good model for facilitating understanding different cultures. What would be the a better training model would be if we consider cultures? I myself, I think I'm very lucky that I trained at the Tavistock, and then I trained with the British Society, and I live in London for 15 years. That really helps me to see my own culture. I never seen it until I live in London, and until I was surrounded by people so different from me. You know, we're all the same, but we are also so different. And I noticed the self presentation is so different. How I present myself was so different from those colleagues around me, and the way we expressed ourselves. So I had to unlearn what I learned in the schooling system in Taiwan, and to learn a new way to present myself in order to in a better position to communicate with my colleagues. You know, I would think that for the trainees, for the local trainees having an opportunities to go abroad, such as Indian Society and Taiwanese Study Group, we can send trainees to kind of go exchanged and go to another culture to live there for a few months. I think that would be very helpful, because you don't see your own culture until you live in another culture. So if you want to become a more kind of multicultural, if you want to develop your own perspective and to be more able to see, then you have to live in a different environments, interact with different group of people who present, or they present themselves in such a different way, and then that would enrich your self and would enrich your understanding as well. So perhaps a better training would be like we kind of in exchange our trainees for a few months, or perhaps 6 months, and then for those candidates to live in a different place and learn from that place, those people from that place. Otherwise, if we always conducted our training locally, then no, it's quite hard to see yourself.
Students are more than welcome if that is a provision that we can start thinking about, student exchange. Our next question is, thinking about Dr. Fan's presentation, How could one think of a universal psychoanalytic psychopathology if mental conflicts have that cultural influence?
Yes. Some people think so, that pathology, human pathology is cultural or social economic constructed. And there were some studies on, it's in the 1980s. There are people going to China studying depression, actually, because Chinese people's depression is quite prominent. And I personally think that's related to this kind of very tight family connections, and the individual is not allowed enough space to be an individual. But you know, depression in our culture will be seen as, you know, we have Chinese medicine who would say that, oh, this person got very low energy, low spirit, and we got special kind of herbs to treat that. So being depressed, we have a special term about to describe the depressed person, and that depression might cause by this cultural, I don't want to say oppression, but somehow it could be this kind of what I describe in my paper. That kind of environment could cause the individuals becoming depressed. But this kind of depression would be well looked after by the whole family. And there would be Chinese medicine, and the parents would look after this depressed adult children or child, and still buying all these Chinese herbs, looking after them. So in a way, it's kind of interconnected within a society, within a culture, that culturally you might create some kind of pathology, but that pathology would be well looked after. There would be a special explanation of that condition, and then that condition would be looked after, and not so much kind of being alienated.
I think then you've talked about familial narcissism. It kind of helps over here because of staying together and having stronger family ties.
Yes. Yeah.
It is very helpful in this situation. And I think one major problem of depression is the isolation that often happens in the individualistic societies where social support is very difficult to find.
Yeah.
And I think our next question is directed to Mr. Stool. It asks, if splitting and the other as defense become prominent during a climate of fear, such as with the pandemic and economic uncertainty, what can help heal such divisions?
And heal such.
Such divisions.
I think that in the pandemic, there was so much isolation. And now what I'm thinking of, that in India, even, you know, the poor sections of the society, there was no possibility of isolation. They're living so much cheek by jowl that there was no isolation. And hence, there wasn't that same kind of isolation that was felt in more secure areas or economically better off areas where you were sequestered within your own home. You couldn't go out. What is presently being done in China, and also for which there are a great amount of protests. But I do think that that would create some kind of paranoia about this germ that is constantly around you and can attack you any moment, and you're not safe anywhere. So it's almost like a metaphor that this outside situation is like some alien bug is going to enter you, kill you, end your life. And it did create quite a lot of paranoia. And maybe sometimes I think many governments reacted very strongly, and there may be a question really as to how much was needed and how much was not. It really is a big question. But it certainly did make people feel depressed. They were alone. Marriages had difficulties because suddenly two people were at each other with no space to go out, no external outlet for them, either in walks or playing or meeting friends. And it certainly did promote. Maybe phone lines or maybe talking would have been one way to help. And we in Bombay did try and open a line where people could come and speak on the phone and get some other voice to listen to.
Okay. We have a comment here. It's not a question. The comment says, shame is a shame is very much a part of Indian culture, regardless of their gender. One of the main reasons why stigma is prevalent towards accessing mental health services. Would you like to comment, Mr. Stool? It's just a comment that has been made.
Yes, but I think it is changing drastically from maybe when I was practicing 30 years ago. I know one young woman who came to me for about 2 or 3 years, and then she said now she had to start looking for prospective grooms, and she couldn't come to analysis because she couldn't be seen to be having analysis. So there was but now I find that there is less and less, more and more openness, even in the poorest sections, because we have services in schools of really lower socioeconomic classes, where the children are in free schools. The parents are so concerned and that their children get help. Even adolescents are addressed by teachers, by parents, and they're keen to receive help. Of course, there are some who will not and say it's a stigma. Is he mad, or do you think it's either you have to be mad to be psychoanalyzed or to have anything like that. So I don't think it's really that much of an issue, certainly not in the more well-to-do class of people. But it might be individually. So even in America, there might be people who don't want to go because they don't want to be seen to be going to an analyst.
Is it quite, because India is very big, isn't it? That's a big country. So perhaps there would be kind of internal cultural differences between different areas.
Would you like to answer that, Mr. Stool?
Yes, but I don't have any experience of working in rural areas, so I wouldn't know what is happening there. But I do know that their treatment for mental illness, some illness can be something quite bizarre, like the person has been possessed, there's a demon, and some shaman will try and beat it out of the person. So I really can't, it's so vast, like Sumay says, and there is no accessibility. India has a appalling 0.02% of medical help to mental health, medical attention given to mental health. Because so much attention in our country is given to, first of all, erasing poverty, that mental health comes up far, third, fourth, fifth, something like that.
I would just like to add to what Mr. Stoor said to answer Dr. Phan's question. During, I think, right after my master's, I did a research on mental health right violations and the concept of right amongst people who are suffering from mental illness. So for that, I had to go to very different parts of the suburbs of Calcutta. So which were from where I had seen very poor people coming from very poor background, where these were cheap clinics or clinics who were providing free medicines and free services. Some of them were like that, and some of them were the belonging to the cities where the more people from more economically stable backgrounds were going. So I did see that, while growing up, mental health issues were not so much discussed even in regular families like ours. But I did see the change over there where people were going to doctors. They didn't understand much, maybe, but people were coming to psychiatrists to take medicine because they understood the pain they were experiencing because of the symptoms, the difficulties. And many of them were doing that because they couldn't go to a job where they get paid for daily wages. So their job is getting affected. So monetarily, they are getting affected, and hence they needed the medicine. But they were still going. I think that is something, irrespective of stigma, people have at least started understanding this thing that I have to remain functional for whatever reason. I have to remain functional. And for that, some people will go to psychiatrists, some people will go to quacks, like as Ms. Stool said, and some people will go to psychoanalysts or psychotherapists. There, I guess the monetary aspect obviously becomes very important. But yes, it is a vast improvement, but maybe not there's miles to go to improve further.
Mm.
There are two more questions. How to address some of the problems immigrants face having lost contact with their culture?
Minnie, would you like to?
I couldn't hear it clearly.
How to address some of the problems immigrants face having lost contact with their cultures?
I'm just thinking that, do you really lose contact with your culture, or do you carry it within you? And I can say from my personal experience, while I was in London, I was very much conscious of my own culture and pretty proud of it. And I thought it was marvelous. And many, many things in psychoanalysis were apparent to me within Indian culture. I think if you carry some confidence within yourself, you don't have to give up your culture. You can be part of you can ameliorate with the foreign culture, and as many people do. I think it may be a matter of who feels alienated and how much you allow yourself others to make you feel alienated. I think that could also be a personal issue. Of course, there are discrimination. We cannot deny that. And maybe Sue May might also be able to say how she managed it.
As you are, I am proud of my culture as well. At the same time, I'm very happy to learn from different cultures and be part of different culture. I think one needs connection with one's own people. So even in London, I have my own Taiwanese friends or Chinese friends. And then I like to have connection with local people, with British people, and create that sense of being at home. So being at home within oneself, as Minnie just said, that you feel connected with your internal, those cultural aspects you internalized, as well as creating an external network of your own culture. But be careful not to kind of becoming too insulated with your own culture and with your own people. And that, because that would only makes you feel more alienated in a foreign place. So actually kind of establishing local connection with local people is a way, it might surprise you, that is a way to help you to feel connected with your own culture. Because by being locally connected, then you build up a new sense of being at home, and that would help you internally to feel more connected with the home that you comes from. That's my approach, and I found that helped me greatly. So by the time I lived in London for 3-4 years, I feel at home, and when I come back to Taiwan, I feel at home. And when I kind of hold myself, I walked around in London and I feel that this is my place too. And I feel at home as a Taiwanese, as well as someone, a trainee studying at the Tavistock or a candidate at the Institute. But that would be kind of my gratitude towards my analysts. They helped me quite a lot. So I thought for immigrants to deal with their kind of momentary sense of loss of their own culture, it might quite helpful to find someone to talk to, a local person to talk to, and then to feel reconnected with another human being, and that would help you to feel kind of reconnected with your own culture. So that's my experience.
Gina, I would like to add that while there may be instances of, discrimination, but is it also how much one allows oneself or one is susceptible to it? As we can see just now, across the board in America, there's so many Indians who are all CEOs of company, of Microsoft, of the IT companies, of Coca-Cola, of Pepsi, and so on. And recently I saw one of these kind of little young children who are geniuses, and amongst them was one Indian little girl who had invented something or the other. So I think it's also about how you face it, how you allow yourself, and maybe your family structure is the important thing that gives you a sense of being. I am who I am, and I'm glad to be it. But when that's shaky, then you're more susceptible.
I think what I understand from what both of you are saying, on the one hand, there's that integration of our family, our roots within ourselves, and if we can identify with that, that we can take along with us anywhere. I mean, of course, if it's a permanent immigrating condition, there can be this sense of mourning, but still, if it's within us, then we can still relive it in our everyday existence in a new country or a new continent as well. And Dr. Fan is trying to say that along with that, we have to also open up to the local people and learn their culture and how we can integrate that and enrich our experiences as well. And that's what diversity brings in, to understand who we are as rooted in our family and our country, and who we can be when we integrate other countries and other values from other people who are slightly different from us, apparently at least. I think there's just one last question that we have, which is more technical. Thank you for the insightful presentations. Is the conference in Delhi hybrid as well as in person? I think the person also wants to find out whether he or she can attend it in offline or online sessions. I think Mr. Stool would be a better person to answer that.
Yes, it is both. It's hybrid as well as in person.
So if somebody wants to register for in the online version, they can do that. You mean?
Yes, but I think that certain like being together groups, it cannot be hybrid. That will have to be in person. Small
Yes.
discussion groups will have to be in person. But I think panel discussions, keynote addresses will be open. I think he'd have to go to the website to see, but I know that some people will be attending online.
We don't have any more question. Would you like to conclude and say something more? Otherwise, I will conclude the session.
I think I say enough.
No, I was thinking, Jane, I'm sorry, you may go on.
No, I'm just saying that I don't have further comments to make.
I was thinking about bridging differences and what you said, Jalem, that you are in another country. Similarly, as you may said, you can't become in an enclave or ghettoize yourself because there's richness in every place. And of course, one of the most wonderful ways to expand yourself is to visit other countries, not necessarily only as a psychoanalyst, but that may not be economically possible for so many people. But maybe movies and things that are now being shown, internet is continuously expanding on a kind of network over the globe. And it is, you can't say no country is now in a way isolated, except one that I can think of, which is the worst possible example. At the same time, I think our world is getting into a place where nobody is really isolated.
So becoming a global citizen.
I think so.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fan and Ms. Stool. I would like to end with a thank you note. Firstly, I was thrilled when Mariano asked me to moderate this webinar, and I was eagerly looking forward to it. I'm thankful to him and the communication subcommittee to consider me to be capable of such an important role. Obviously, my heartfelt gratitude goes to both of you. This is a very difficult topic, very complex one, but we had such a smooth flow of understanding of this as much as is possible in such short time. I also have to thank Matthew, who has been very instrumental in helping us with all the technical arrangements. I don't think this would have been a success without his help. And finally, I'm sure all of us are thankful to our enthusiastic audience who were so responsive and empathetic to the panel and bringing in such invigorating questions. I think you can see on the screen that there are, for our next webinars, you'll have to visit the ipa.world website for registering for all the new webinars and also accessing the recordings if you cannot attend the webinars. With that, we come to the closure of the event today. Thank you, all of you. Have a great day and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you in Delhi.
Yes.